So yeah, just this idea of like maybe the idea of the ethical concerns.
Yeah, I mean, this is definitely a project that concerns are everywhere.
Hmm.
Um, and in some ways, I think I kind of chose this project because I wanted to dive into something that was ethically really challenging in the hopes that it would make me think deeper about this stuff and work harder to address those concerns, to be aware of those concerns, um, but also to kind of be more sensitive about this whole thing. I mean, I think I say in the book, I could have written a story about smugglers that just paints them in the most negative light based on things that I kind of knew, heard from others, but
Hmm.
without ever having to leave my office.
Hmm.
And I said to myself that I wasn't going to be lazy. So I wanted to write about smugglers, and I had to kind of be there with them, and I had to commit myself to being as fair as possible. And part of that is really, I mean, you know, I think I write a little bit about this in the beginning of the book too. I mean, um, one of the things that has always struck me about my own approach to the work is that I have a very high tolerance for unpleasant things. And, I think that's because as a kid, I was exposed to a lot of violent kind of behavior. Um, I was sexually abused as a child, emotionally abused as a child. These are things that like really fucked me up. And, my teenage years, my 20s was characterized by what I've come to really understand is like parasuicidal behavior, where it's just
Hmm.
like live fast, die, hope someone will kill me because I don't have it in me to do it myself, but I definitely want it I want this whole thing to kind of end. And, I find myself working with all these guys who are very much in the same boat. And I think because we sort of shared some of these sort of common experiences,
Hmm.
um, that gave me it allowed me to, I think, to try to understand the violence that they were perpetuating or that was around them in a way that, had I not been exposed to the stuff early on, had I not had what I used to characterize as like a thick skin, and now I just think about it as
Hmm.
like damaged goods kind of thing.
Uh,
It allowed me to try to not be as judgmental as I might have been if I had come from a different kind of background. But that being said, even with me trying to be as understanding about stuff as much as possible, you're witness to a lot of brutal things, and you have to decide on a case by case basis, like, do I say something? Is
hmm.
this too much? Do I walk away? When do I intervene? And
Hmm.
I think a lot of times in the book, my voice is the loudest in the narrative in the moments where I'm struggling with those questions of like,
Hmm.
oh my God, what are we going to do? Why is this happening?
Hmm.
Should I still be here? And I think for me, part of the way to deal with the ethical problems of this research is to be as open and honest with the reader as possible. And I had someone ask me the other day, like, what about the things that I left out of this book that were too much? And I said there wasn't much that
Hmm.
I left out. I pretty much included almost everything,
Hmm.
the good, the bad, and the ugly, because I felt like I needed to be really honest about the experiences that I was having.
Right.
And I think it's through that honesty that I hope that you come to trust the narrator more, that the stories become a little bit more real. But it definitely helps me to sleep at night knowing that I did the
Hmm.
best I could to just be as forthright as humanly possible about, the difficulties of doing the work.
I appreciate that. Thanks for sharing that. It's got to be a two-way street, right? With trust. I wonder about kind of how that worked and how you kind of proved yourself to be trustworthy.
You know, they're good judges of character. And like I said, I'm like super open about most things in my life. And I
Hmm.
think people are, these guys, if they're not good judges of character, they're going to be dead soon. And
Hmm.
so they know when you're lying, it's like they're like Santa Claus. They know when they know when you've been good or
Hmm.
when you've been bad kind of thing. And with this stuff, I was just always like, hey, this is what I'm doing. This is what I'm up to. I really want to be here,
Hmm.
and I'm more than willing to to commit my time and energy and to be really
Yeah.
open about stuff. And I think part of the process too is these folks are unloading on me, sharing so much, and
Hmm.
so the reciprocity in that is that, like I do that too.
Hmm.
And initially it was like I'm doing it so that you can trust me. Like I'm telling you about my life, and we're finding the commonalities. But then it really also became sort of about group therapy of like
Yeah.
we're talking about our lives, how they've ended up where they are, and I'm I'm trying to understand, and partly through understanding, it's just creating a really intense dialogue.
Hmm.
But it's a very emotional kind of, commitment to folks. And I think, part of it too is like, um, you work with people like with students. I mean, you work with students. I mean, it's hard not to be emotionally connected to your students. You
Oh
care
yeah.
about them. You want them to succeed. You want to get to know them so that you can
Hmm.
better understand them and help them.
Hmm.
And that comes um, with a lot of personal kind of commitment. But I think the students respond to that when they know that you're there for them and that you are working really, really hard to understand where they're coming from. They reciprocate. And I think for me, it's the same way with working
Hmm.
with these guys. And for many
Hmm.
of them, I was probably the only, one of the few people in their lives who had ever wanted to be in that kind of relationship with them.
Hmm. You you talk about, I mean, is it safe to say somewhere like the seeds for the book where like the UMP, the Undocumented Migration Project, you felt like the story was incomplete as far as um smugglers weren't like you talked about earlier, they weren't necessarily given the well-rounded drawing, if you will, the image. And also really interesting that, and this isn't you making that up, this is the way things have been in more recent years, the last 10, 15 years, you can talk about how many, but like that it's not the old stereotype of like the Mexican migrant, right? It's Central Americans. There was the unaccompanied minors, kind of, crisis, quote unquote, 2014 or so. But it's a different world, and you focus mainly on Hondureños, right? Those from
Mm.
Honduras, which is really interesting. I mean, I learned so much, and but you GOET, the acronym,
Oh yeah.
the beginning of the book, and Honduras. You talk about the School of the Americas. I was I was cited or arrested, whatever you want to call it, at School of the Americas in 2001, 2002. It has a different name now, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
It's very like technical, very futuristic. It's very supposed to be what's the word? And it's non-threatening. But sorry, long way of getting at basically just I guess Honduras in particular in Central America and what how that story is different than the old stereotypical migration tale.
Yeah, I mean, one of the jokes that we had when we were getting down to the finishing of this book was whether or not we should put Honduras in the title. And I said, well, you should
Mm.
you should only put Honduras in the title of this book if you want nobody to read it, because nobody cares about Honduras.
Oh
I
wow.
mean, despite the fact that, Honduras has played an important role in U.S. foreign relations in the Western Hemisphere. We've got a military base there that we might lose with all of this kind of
Mm.
stuff the Trump administration is currently doing to Honduras. Um, you know, those are the folks that I ended up spending the most time with, and it was a very eye-opening experience for me to learn about, Honduras, to learn about the Garifuna, Afro-Hondurans, to learn about um, just the differences, the kind of uniqueness of that country and its history compared to a place like El Salvador
Yeah.
or Guatemala. And I think what tends to happen is people clump Central American country all together. They just assume like, oh, Panama is the same as El Salvador, is the same as
Mm.
Honduras. They all have radically different histories,
Mm.
experiences, relationships to the United States. And so I really wanted to kind of dig into that partly because I think Honduras has been really neglected. There's not a
Mm.
lot written about it, unfortunately, and I think that's a shame. And so I think we need a better understanding of what that experience is. But
Mm.
also, I think it's the perfect microcosm to understand what it looks like when the U.S. meddles in someone else's politics,
Mm.
in their economy, and also it's a laboratory for understanding how climate change impacts migration. I mean,
Yes.
I mean, we're watching it unfold every year and go, people go, oh, how can you keep saying that climate change and migration are linked? And you're like, watch what happens in Honduras as soon as these back-to-back hurricanes dissipate. People
Mm.
are going to, as soon as those floodwaters recede, they're going to hop down and they're going to run to the United States. That's how
Mm.
these things kind of work. And so,
Yeah.
Honduras became a good place to kind of talk about that stuff. And it felt really manageable historically, and it would have been harder to do that, like to talk about Mexican migrants. I mean, it's like
Mm.
it's a vastly different type of geography, and
Hmm.
it's a more intense kind of form of diversity. But
Hmm.
um, it just so happened at the time that I was doing the work that those were primarily the folks that were crossing, and obviously things have shifted now to Venezuela, west, to Africa. You
Yeah.
got people coming up from all over the place through the Darien Gap. But when I began the work in 2015, it was really around the height of this movement of Hondurans towards the United States.
Mm. The You make the point that there's, some of the same, like like you said, Central America is obviously the countries have their different histories, but MS-13 does run through a lot of, right? I started in started in LA, went to El Salvador. But so a lot of, so the mareros, right? The
Mm.
gangsters, and they sometimes end up being the same people on the route. So in other words, if someone is so many of the people in the book are running from the gangs, but you write about how very interestingly and unfortunately a lot of times they run into the same type of,
Yep.
right. You talk about how a lot of the gangs run things, especially in southern Mexico, right? You talk about like certain neighborhoods in Mexico City even, right, where it wasn't necessarily gangs, but like it's a Haitian area or
Yep.
it's a Honduran area. Um, so like you talk about the just a shifting demographic from the old narrative. Zero is one of the characters who um, talks about one of his first trips. You write about one of his first trips as a smuggler. He's under 25. So many of the characters are. I was so struck in the book about how just about youth. So many of the characters, not all, but so many of the smugglers that you portray, they're so young. And I think about you talk a lot about privilege in the book, and obviously I am aware of the privilege where you can mess up when you're 20, and if you're in a certain demographic, right? You can mess up so much,
Yep.
and you fail upwards. Look at our president, right?
Yeah.
And then the idea, but I just wonder about how much you saw youth as kind of like a theme or a motif or whatever, where, there were a lot of people who they were already trying to repent, if you will, at 24 or
Yep.
26. And just about the stupid things that all of us do when we're young, and some people don't necessarily get a chance to make up for that, smooth it
Yeah.
over.
Well, there's a moment in the book, I think it's with Santos, where you kind of get to know him in different stages of his life, like all the things that happened to him as a
Hmm.
child. He gets kidnapped by the Zetas, he gets tortured, he's smuggling people, he's in the United States, he's getting deported, he's going through, like, he's getting threatened by gangs. A million horrible things are happening to
Hmm.
him. Um, he goes to prison, he's falsely accused of stuff, and um, I wait to get through a lot of that stuff, and then I kind of reveal or remind the reader, like, this guy's 20. And
Right.
and people just go like, holy shit, like he
Yeah.
has lived this intense life.
Hmm.
He's not even old enough to drink in this country. Um,
Hmm.
and for me, yeah, I mean, I spent a lot of time with young people, and it's funny, a lot of them would um like someone like Kingston, who I'm older than, and actually I'm older than any character in this book, and
Hmm.
they would often refer to me as little brother, hermanito.
Hmm.
And I think part of that was because um one, I'm just like a bumbling anthropologist who's sort of following them around and don't know what the hell's going on. But part of it too is they've just lived a lot more life than I ever could have, and
Yeah.
it was really clear. And yeah, I mean the youth stuff. I mean that's the thing that really struck with me, and struck me in a lot of ways was these guys are going through it, and they're not even out of their teens yet,
Right.
and the things that they have seen. I mean, that's like I like the moment where like Papo is he has to go to high school. He like
Right.
enrolls in school. He's a
Right.
sophomore. I mean, he's running from a murder. He's seen his friends murdered. I
Yeah,
mean,
yeah,
all
yeah.
this stuff. And I think to myself, you know, when we talk about migrants or undocumented youth that come to this country, we have no idea often what those people have been through, how difficult their lives have been, and how grateful they are to just sleep on a bed.
Hmm.
And it's really for me that's one of the sadder things is just like the 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 young people who just get swallowed up by this system and who really just never have a chance to
Yeah.
live a normal life. It really killed me. And then like seeing like the little kids in this whole scenario who
Hmm.
you knew they were going down this route and there was very little that could be done. It was a real heartbreaker.
Mm.
But someone like Santos, someone like Chino, I mean, these are guys who are trying to change their lives. And I found a lot of hope in that and, and a lot of respect for I hate the word resilience, but watching these
Yeah.
guys, just try to make a go of it. Um, and, trying to find some small inkling of happiness.
I'm sure being in LA, and just being generally aware of the world, I'm sure you know about Father Greg Boyle,
Oh yeah.
right? And so he talks about, I'm not going to say exactly correctly, but the idea that like we hopefully as a society can stop thinking about, I don't know, what they've done, and think more about what they've had to go through to get there. I'm not saying it so poetically, but
Yeah.
just be like more like be in awe of what they've had to carry,
Yeah.
right? There's what is it like? There's some sort of acronym, something adverse experience. It's like a quotient. It's like a number,
Yeah.
right? AE, whatever. And I mean the stories. I mean the people seeing their brothers die in a what electrocution, working
Yeah.
like the tree trunks, and the gangs, and the being forced, and God, Jasmine, and that absolute, the one who was basically spying on her for like years, and
Yeah.
hoping that she would get with him, and just all the experiences that you talk about, losing parents, just amazing, like you said, what they carry.
I mean, it struck me the moment when I realized that everybody that I was writing about, like, because I was thinking to myself, like, who do I know that's been murdered? Do I know anyone that's been murdered? And I had to really dig deep to think about that. And I could find maybe one person who is like 1 or 2 degrees separated from
Sure,
me,
sure.
wasn't like, my best friend or, and when I realized that everyone in this book knew someone who had been murdered, almost all of them had seen someone they cared about be murdered.
Mm.
That for me was like, thinking about the commonality of these like youthful experiences
Hmm.
and what that does to folks was a really like eye-opening and utterly shocking kind of thing that
Yeah.
the exposure to violence so early it just really breaks my heart. And but also, these folks are really working to like
Mm.
not have these something that would probably destroy me not be
Right,
these life
right,
defining moments, and to just
right.
say, I'm still trying to move forward, I'm still trying to find hope, I'm still trying to be a good person despite all the things that have been thrown my way.
You mentioned Herman Hesse. Was his the man's, no, that was Frankel, Victor, Man's Search for Meaning,
Oh yeah,
I
yeah.
believe, right? But yeah, but just the idea, like you said, like that was this, it would destroy me, the things you wrote
Yeah.
about. And I think like how are you a 6-year-old in Gaza, and you see what happened, and how are you not just pissed off at the world? How are you not
Yeah.
just angry and violent and self-destructive? How are you not?
Yeah.
It feel like
Yeah.
the norm would be that, and the exception would be to be, well adjusted, or whatever you want to call it, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah.
Oh man. Mir, I'm not sure if I have the name right. Warsan Shire is the poet, the writer from,
Mm,
I want to say, from East Africa, and her famous poem is called Home. No one leaves home unless home is the mouth of a shark,
mm.
which is like damn, right?
Yeah.
I wonder about how you saw that kind of manifest in, I mean, guys getting caught 3 and 4 times. You talk about the one who's tortured by the Zetas, getting caught by ICE and sent back, and Border Patrol and this and that, but still like, I'm going again. Like
Yeah.
what it is about this shark at home, if you will, that made the people, at least in the book, want to keep trying.
I mean, that's the thing to think about, right? Like, how bad must things be if your only
For
choice
Luka
is to
Doncic to get traded from the Mavs. Sorry. Sorry,
yeah,
sorry,
I
sorry,
mean,
sorry, sorry.
yeah.
On a more lighthearted note, right? That's what they're saying.
Yeah.
That's what they're
But I
saying.
mean,
Right.
I think about you know, when people would say things to me like, "Oh, when we had all these miners crossing the desert and people and
Mm,
kids being sent out, people would say, I
mm,
can't believe these parents, these Mexican parents or
mm.
these Honduran parents that they would risk their kids' lives and put them in the hands of smugglers and have them dragged through the desert.
Right.
Like how could you ever do such a thing?"
Yeah.
And I'd say to them like, you can't frame it like that.
Mm,
You have to frame it in terms of how bad must it be at home for that to be the best possible choice that
mm.
one could make for their child.
Yeah, 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 yeah.
And, you know, um, it's this idea that like somehow people in foreign poor people don't love their kids as much as
Mm,
Americans do, and it's like it's like these falsehoods, and really I can't imagine being put into a situation where you have to hand over your child to a stranger and hope for the best.
yeah.
Um, I mean, that kills me. But that also signals that things are that bad in a lot of these
Hmm.
places, and that there is no border wall that is going to deter that. Like
Right,
people
right.
are running, they're running for their lives. They're trying to save their children, and so they will do whatever they need to do to make that happen.
Yes.
Um,
Yeah, I mean, obviously, dehumanize or humanization is so overrated. Is not the word. So overused. I've seen some great things recently with all the madness with ICE, like posts about, just like, can we just say we want to the idea that people need to be, like you said earlier, kind of like the model migrant, like they're just people. Can we start there? And
yeah,
again, I'm kind of oversimplifying it, but just the idea that, like, yeah, dehumanization. This is not a mom who loves her kid less. This is a mom who says, I want to give my kid a chance. And, there's this shark back home. I think of like the people from, let's say, Northern Africa, East Africa, Afghan people who are trying to go across the Mediterranean Sea. I mean, in a dinghy, in a little boat. Like, how bad must the shark be? How scary
yeah,
must the shark be? Right? Uh, I wonder about so you write about is it Palenque, is that how you pronounce
yep,
right? And the Bestia, a lot of people know about the Bestia,
yep.
that train and people on top of it, and horrible accidents that happen and people trying to hang on just to go north. Um, but I wonder about what you saw there compared to kind of what you had heard. I mean, is it is that something that's not as used anymore because there are so many different routes, and like we talk about, more Central American focused, or just something that's more common, I guess?
Yeah, the train, for a while that was the preferred method of travel because it was free. I mean, it's dangerous, but at least it was free.
Yeah.
Um, and they really shut it down about 10, 12 years ago. And so it runs in certain parts of the country, but it won't get you very far.
Mm,
Um, and it's also heavily policed now. I
right.
had a graduate student who did a dissertation on how private security firms have taken over train security, and they just will indiscriminately shoot migrants, kidnap them, do all
Jeez.
kinds of stuff. And so the train is like now just it's occasionally an option, but
Hmm.
people are getting across Mexico by any means necessary. Lancha, boat, um, the trunk of a car, the luggage hold of a bus, the
Mm,
back of a taxi. They're walking, they're running. I mean, they're doing everything they can. Sometimes they're on the train, but it's a real mix now, and it's so much harder to get across Mexico. It takes so much longer, and it's way more expensive than it ever was.
mm. You do such an incredible job with the flashbacks. Um you'll kind of simple word I can't think of. You'll characterize, you'll describe one of the people, like Chino, and there's a flashback where he was, unfortunately, basically abandoned by his mom, right? And he had a very loving sister entre comillas, but like I guess it was technically his aunt, right? Marina,
Yeah.
right? The brother Miguel, or the uncle, dying at 28 in a horrible accident, just how that's incredibly demoralizing to a family. Just giving us this background to make what made these people who they are, what made them want to run, what made them not want to run, all those kind of things. You use the term clavo.
hmm
A clavo is kind of like something that I'm on the hook for. How would you describe the clavo and like the pitfalls, like in Honduras, and how that affects the migrants and the migration?
It's like a scarlet letter.
Hmm.
Like you've done this thing and now you're marked by it, or you refuse to do a thing that they want you to do, and so they
Hmm.
marked you as someone who is now vulnerable, is a target. And so once that happens, then you got to get out of there. And so a
Hmm.
lot of these guys, they didn't want to be in gangs anymore. They didn't want to do the kind of the dirty
Hmm.
work that was being asked of them.
Hmm.
And once you refuse that, that's when you get the clavo and they say, okay, well, you got a couple choices here. You do
Hmm.
what we say, you leave, or we kill you.
Hmm.
And so, it's and those gangs have a long memory. And so
Hmm.
it's not like you can go for a year and come back. I mean, this can go on for almost your whole life before you can maybe return to a place. And a lot of those folks will never go back to those what they thought of as home initially. And now they don't have a home. I mean, they're kind of stateless, wandering,
Mhm.
souls looking for a place to put down some roots and try to be safe.
Yeah, that part's so interesting. You think about, obviously, you know that if you're coming from El Salvador or Honduras or even Venezuela, you obviously know that's a long trip, but you think it's either going to end in the States or it's going to end maybe with deportation. And you do know that there are people who, but there's so many people in the purgatory, if you will, right? So many people in flux who stay in this city, who decide to stay in this city, who are temporarily. One of the things that's so interesting about this book is just the fluid terms. This guy might start off as a smuggler, then he's the smuggly or whatever the term
Yeah,
is, right? And like Kingston, who's Garifuna, right? Like African descent of Honduras. And he talks about the different ways that black migrants are treated. He talks about how you really do have to be tough. You have to at least play the role if that's not in you. And for some characters, you talk about this not in them to be, you have
hmm
to be a local, he writes about, right? Just so interesting about that fluid thing where a guy is going one day from being a doting father to somebody who has to dole out violence,
yeah,
to somebody who cries, to somebody who, it's just so interesting in that. I just kind of want, the book is so interesting and I want people to, I don't want to, spoon feed it to everyone. I want them to really read this book. It's so interesting. I wish it were fiction. It would be an
mm,
incredible fictional story like, oh, that's cool, like as if they're characters. Unfortunately, it's not. But I was just so struck by like the number, like 75% poverty in Honduras right after COVID hit. That, that's the shark. And
yeah,
obviously there's so many other ways, but just like what do you do with that? If there's how do you blame someone for trying to get a better life, a different life? But that number to me was just so staggering that you wrote about like kind of interrupting your research obviously for obvious reasons, but it's like it was 65% poverty in Honduras and that's horrific. And you wonder how much of it is caused by American colonialism and all these things you talk about. But even after COVID, it's
yeah.
75%, right? You're not looking for easy answers, and there are none, like you said. But I wonder, one of your last chapters is called "The Future Belongs to Those Who Dream." There are those looking for and maybe getting some sort of redemption. How did you leave the book? Do you have hope? Is that not what it was about? Just the idea of the future belonging to those who dream.
Yeah, because that's Flacco is wearing that. There's a picture of him wearing that T-shirt, and I
Yep.
and I don't think a lot of those guys wear these really ironic shirts, and they don't understand what it actually means.
Well,
And
sorry, what
and
was the one that you took a photo of that you said was so funny?
um
Like in the book, you narrated that part. Shoot, it was something about maybe the
oh,
doble sentido or something.
or like BYU,
Yes, that was the one.
yeah, yeah, Chino's wearing this BYU shirt,
The
and
Mormons.
it's so funny because he's just like a weed smoking, beer guzzling, kind of maniac. Um, I think, for me, there's a couple of ways to think about hope. I mean, one, the story ends kind of badly for a lot of folks. I mean, Flacco goes from being big wheeling and dealing to just being super destitute. Kingston has his own problems. Um, but some of these other folks kind of escape. They escape to the
Yeah.
US. They find a new life there. It's a difficult life. It's the life of an immigrant. It's the life of being undocumented, but it's a better one than they were living in these other places. And so, some of that gives me hope. And I think it's hope not in this Hollywood, like he gets the girl, they ride off into the sunset, everything. It's more like he doesn't die. He falls in with the crew. He's got a
Mhm.
place to live, but it sucks but it's better than it was. And that's for me a lot more realistic about the way that things kind of end for folks, and that you have to find hope in smaller versions of it, of like, the hope is I'm still alive today. The hope is I haven't done something bad today. The hope
Mhm.
is I have plans for the future that don't involve going back to the train tracks, that don't
Mhm.
involve having to do dirty work. And so
Mhm.
I tried to look for it in those small places, and folks were really optimistic when they talk about these things. They had, not lofty aspirations, but they definitely had, hopeful ones. And
Yeah.
there's a moment where Santos says, like, all I want is to sleep on a real bed, and I'm like, God, I
Insane.
mean,
Yeah.
yeah, I mean that's such a powerful statement and really speaks to his experiences.
Mm.
And the other hope for me, so my friend Roberto, he dies early on in the field work, And he's the first person I know that is murdered directly. And it sends me into this deep tailspin. I'm so depressed. I think I'm just going to quit my job. I'm like, I don't think I could do anthropology anymore. It has
Hmm.
literally broken my heart to the point where I
Hmm.
don't want to do it anymore. And then I did some soul searching and kind of fell back into this thing of like, well, I committed to telling his story and I'm going to try to do it and I want to do it. And so I'm going to invest my time and energy to do this thing. And which is what kind of set the whole project really off. And the hope, maybe the whole reason for writing this book at the end of the day, or one of the big reasons was he comes back to life at the very end. And he gets to be alive for a moment. He gets to talk shit and laugh. And I get to remember him in that way. I get to visualize him. And I get to show other people who this person was. And he gets to kind of live on in this book. And, there's hope. That gave me a little bit of hope in that, everyone's story is important. I think we just have to listen. And I tried to listen to his story and I really I wanted other people to to know him and to feel the kind of complicated feelings that I had about him, but to recognize that he was a person and that he was important to many people. And now, hopefully, he's important to to folks outside of that little orbit that he was in. But being able to be with him again and to bring him back to life, even for a brief moment, for me, um, also just kind of gave me hope about the maybe the power of storytelling.
Yeah, earlier on, Chino says no one ever listens to our stories.
Yeah.
Yeah, that last page, the last page of the book with those little, the book is so intense. There's so much that happens. You're such a good storyteller. You're embedded. It's just like, okay, this is happening right now. This is all that's happening. This is everything that's happening. It's so expansive, right? This is this person's life, but it's not. It's just a snapshot. It's a week. It's a day. And the way that you end it with those little vignette, not vignette, those little
Yeah.
snapshots, little 2 sentence paragraphs. And like you said, it's not a Hollywood ending, but it's just so successful and just so well done that it's like, yeah, they've had 75 stories happen to them since the book was published. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like,
Yeah.
and that's, if not a reason for optimism, it's not a reason for pessimism, I guess.
Yeah. Yeah.
This book, pardon the pun, has such a long shelf life ahead of it. It's if you want to just study feminism or misogyny in the migration, there's so much there. If you want to study the history of Honduras, the history of some of the Central American countries, the way Central Americans are treated in Mexico, which again is not just a simple answer, but there's so much about the smugglers, there's so much about victims and soldiers and kings, and there's so much about masculinity, so much about youth. It can be taught in a million different classes. It can be taught in an English class, a history of history of Honduras, archaeology. Such a long shelf life, such an important book, and just honored to be able to talk to you. And I really appreciate all of your feedback and giving me the background and just rationale. And thanks so much.
Yeah, Peter, thank you so much. I really, really appreciate it. And it's been great chatting.
Wish you nothing but great luck in the rest of your writing.
All right. Thank you.